Woohoo! Hello everyone, this is Pirate Mage Jelv after a long absence. And I do have a very good reason for my absence. My wife and I have welcomed a tiny little pirate mage in our lives. This means there's much less hobby time and much more parent time, but it's actually a very rewarding trade-off. But, well, let's skip the boring real-life talk and go on to what you've come here for. Today we're having a look at how I paint my Blood Angel Blade Guard veteran. And keep in mind this is not a tutorial, but rather an elaborated paint log. Also, I hope this doesn't disappoint anybody, but the dead Terminator will not be part of the video. The first part we'll be dealing with is the red armor, and please keep in mind that I'm working without a script here because my wife insisted that it might sound better without one. Well, let's see. I'm starting off by shading the armor with a mix of 2 parts Army Painter Pure Red, 1 part Vallejo Heavy Violet, and 1 part Army Painter Matte Black. The paint goes everywhere where shadows would naturally occur, where armor plates interlock, or where there's just a little ridge in the armor. And of course, as seen here, wherever you want to add volume to rounded surfaces. I'm also using the shade to paint the joints between the armor segments, which will make it easier for the darker paint I'll be using later to stick. After shading the entire miniature, I'm using pure red to clean up the mistakes I've made and to prepare some of the surfaces for future highlights. As seen here, the pure red adds light to the top part of the knee pad, which will help emphasize its round shape and adds just loads of volume. Same concept as before, but on a flat surface. Highlighting just adds depth to a mini. The contrast between bright and dark areas is perceived as a difference in height levels. And on to the first real highlights. A mix of 1 part Army Painter Lava Orange and 1 paint Pure Red is applied in 1 mm thin line to most of the armor's edges. After the first highlight, I'm adding 1 part Vallejo white primer to the mix, and then I'm highlighting every edge that would naturally be exposed to light. Some of the edges wouldn't actually be exposed to sunlight, but I'm still highlighting them here because I think that effect beats realism. A final highlight to the most elevated edges with an additional part of white primer creates the impression of sharpness. And on to the gold. I like to use a dark warm brown as a basic layer for gold. It helps bring out both the metal pigments and the soft warm color. To prepare the areas that are later supposed to be gold, I'm using Army Painter Oak Brown. You might have wondered why I didn't paint the helmet red. It's because a Blade Guard veteran, in my opinion, is just that, a veteran. And Blood Angel veterans carry golden helmets. Therefore, I'm priming the helmet in the same brown color that I used to prime all the other areas that are later supposed to be gold. Now that all the relevant areas have been painted in this wonderful, beautiful, warm brown tone, it's time to bring out the actual gold. And as a first step, I'm taking out my Army Painter Greedy Gold and covering every area that I just painted brown with gold. Now, gold is a beautiful color. Unfortunately, it tends to be a little flat until it's shaded and highlighted. So I'm taking out my Citadel Contrast Fyreslayer flesh, water it down a little, and wash over every part I just painted with gold. After the contrast paint has dried, I'm using Citadel Leviathan Purple, a wash, to darkline interlocking segments and recesses. Purple serves as a complementary color to gold and is therefore perfectly suited to create additional depth. The Aquila only receives the purple treatment in some of the deepest recesses. This increases the visual contrast of the various levels in the ornament. And we're back to highlighting. Pure Greedy Gold makes sure that the gold is interesting to look at and has both depth and elevated features. I always thought that Space Marine helmets were a little difficult to paint. The trick is to paint not just the temples, but also the forehead in your highlight color. As you will hopefully agree, this adds a lot of definition to the helmet. Highlighting never ends with me, huh? A mix of 2 parts Greedy Gold and 1 part Vallejo Metal Colors Silver again serves to create a certain sharpness in the edges. For the gold areas, I'm actually highlighting basically everything. I mentioned it before, true metal gold can be rather flat, so it's fine to use all the advantages you can get. For the wings, I'm using Army Painter Ash Grey as the base color. It's a bright grey, but still leaves room for, you might have guessed it, highlights. You probably know it's hard to paint a bright color over a darker one, so I'm using multiple thin coats here. Next step, highlights! Mixing equal parts ash gray and white results in a fine off-white, which can be used for multiple highlights rather than just one. So you can highlight your highlights with the same color, and saying highlights really gets old by now. And now for even more highlights! Just kidding. I'm using a thinned down mix of ash gray and a tiny amount of black to create a wash for the deepest recesses of the wings. The increase in contrast gives the wings much more depth. And now for the cloth. This is actually more of an experiment than something I've had lots of experience with. I was never a big fan of silky cloth and I prefer wool or cotton textures. However, most Warhammer minis look like their tabards and clothes were made out of plastic. Yeah. For a first step, I'm base coating everything with oak brown. Next, I'm painting a mix of 3 parts oak brown and 1 part Army Painter mummy robes everywhere but in the deepest folds. And what looks like yet another highlight is actually the final step in the preparation of the technique I'm about to use. Okay, it's also a highlight. I just added another part, mummy brown, to the previous mix. You might have heard of stippling before, which is what I'm about to use. Stippling basically means I'm painting a lot of tiny dots with watered down paint. The same mix as before, but with yet another part, mummy brown, around the areas I just highlighted. Since these dots are basically transparent, the darker and brighter areas, in theory, will be visually connected and also sport a dotty texture. Let's see if it works out. As you see here, I'm touching up on some areas again and again. So don't be afraid to make mistakes. It's both unavoidable and it's not a big deal. Everybody makes mistakes, and I guess you're not painting for a living, you're just having a hobby, right? And a second layer of dots, this time with pure mummy brown and concentrated on the most elevated cloth edges. That means, yes, basically just another highlight. Finally, a very thin line to create some more definition. And we're done with the cloth. A base coat of black will help make the purple blood drops stand out better against the blood red armor. With a mix of 1 part matte black and 2 parts Vallejo heavy purple, we're laying out a beautiful foundation for a saturated gem-like color. Don't paint the entire blood drop though, just paint about 2/3 of it, that should be enough. A mix of 3 parts heavy purple and 1 part white primer creates a strong contrast. Water it down and paint it as a line around the curve of the drop, and it'll both serve as a highlight and help visually combine the black and purple areas. Adding 1 additional part white primer and highlighting just a fraction of the line I've just drawn creates the impression of a reflection. The cord was painted almost exactly the same way I painted the gems, except that I started with a dark purple base coat instead of a black one. I then proceeded to highlight the most elevated areas with pure heavy purple, and then highlighted them again with a mix of equal parts white primer and heavy purple. You might have heard it before, black on miniatures is rarely ever really black. Depending on the contrast you want to go for, it's either dark blue, brown, or gray. I decided to go for gray because of the nice crisp look it brings with it. I'm starting off with a mix of 4 parts matte black and 1 part white primer. And I also make sure to paint everything but the recesses. For the next step, I'm adding one additional part white primer. This will be the first highlight and allows me to create the base work of these nice sharp edges. When painting the joint armor, be careful to paint your highlight lines shorter than the ones in the previous step. Otherwise, these areas lose lots of their perceived volume. For the belt and leather parts, I'm using the stippling technique again. Lots and lots of little dots on the edges. This creates a worn look. And finally, one more highlight on the weapon casing with equal parts white and black. Back when I built my first armies, I always neglected painting these joints. Easier times, but uglier times too. Time for metal! I'm using Vallejo Metal Colors silver to base coat everything. Well, everything that's supposed to be metal later, not like the entire miniature. That would be crazy. Next step, I'm covering all the silver areas in good old Agrax Earth Shade, or whatever way you want to pronounce it. Be careful not to spill your paint. You know, washes have this nasty habit of being knocked over easily. Now that I have a pretty brown shade to my metal, I'm shading all the metal again with slightly watered down Citadel Contrast Black Templar. This keeps recesses black and surfaces nice and dark. I start feeling like an old record with a crack by constantly repeating the word highlight by now. But yeah, that's what I do. A lot. And with pure silver this time. Technique I'll be using in this video is derived from way back when the Grey Knight plastic minis were first released. All of a sudden people started doing these wonderfully smooth transitions on their Nemesis Force weapons and, well, I want that too. So I'm base coating the blade with Army Painter Crystal Blue. Thanks to the magic of video editing, that one coat will do. But it's actually 3 thin coats until the paint covered everything. I'm not highlighting the sword now. No sir, I'm reverse shading the blade. So everything is left dark that may theoretically cast a shadow. The paint is now 4 parts crystal blue and 1 part white primer. I'm adding an additional part white and I'm painting wide diagonal lines on the blade with a bit of space between them left darker. And I'm repeating the pattern on the other half of the blade, the middle of the new lines being where the darker areas on the previous part are. With the same color, I'm drawing a line in the middle of the blade to provide some more definition to its shape. At this point, my power weapon effect looks a little like super faded hazard stripes, so in order to make it look better, it needs more contrast. I'm adding an additional part white to the point, and we're back to not highlighting things, but adding more and brighter paint to areas we've painted before. All jokes aside, I'm painting about 2/3 of the white lines in a brighter color. For the final step, I'm basically repeating the previous step. You know, add some more white paint, then paint the areas you've painted before, but only 2/3 of it. And if you want smoother transitions, you can also add intermediate steps. My blade recipe consists of 4 steps. Make that 7 and you'll have a power weapon effect that just flows like a river of butter. For the helmet lenses, I'm starting with a base coat of black, immediately followed by 1 layer of Army Painter Angel's Green. Immediately thereafter, I'm painting the front part of the lens with Army Painter Jungle Green. Just the front part. A line of equal parts jungle green and white primer at the bottom of the lens creates a sense of depth, and so will the single pure white dot in the corner of the lens. All the Parchment needs is a few layers of oak brown and mummy robes. It doesn't even have to be super clean because Parchment, as an organic material, is fine to have some irregularities. We're starting off with an oak brown base coat, immediately followed by a layer of equal parts oak brown and mummy robes. And I'm continuing with one additional part of mummy robes through the mix. I'm not painting everything here, but I'm using general strokes to leave some areas darker. For the final step, I'm using pure mummy robes, some quick highlights here and there, and the Parchment is done. To be honest, I wasn't sure what exactly this part on the cloth was supposed to be. I decided it was some sort of relic and wanted it to contain some long dead marine's blood. So I started with a black base coat and painted about half of the glass with 2 parts pure red and 1 part black. Then I added a layer of pure red to the dark red area. If there is a liquid in the container, some of it must press against the glass and is therefore in the foreground, while the rest of it is in the background and is therefore darker. A single line of equal parts white and red at the upper edge of the bright red creates the impression of the blood having an actual shape. The same holds true for the background. I'm just using pure red for this line. A single watered down line of Army Painter uniform grey along the length of the glass creates the illusion of, well, glass. And this is the finished Blood Angel. Finished in the sense that the armor and most relevant Blood Angel-y parts are done. Some effects like OSL and weathering might be dealt with in future videos. I hope you enjoyed the time we spent together, and if you did, please let me know in the comments what other contents you would like to see in the future. Also, here's my kill team. Bye bye!